Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us Mr. Tilka Devasher. Mr. Devasher retired as Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India, and presently is a member of the National Security Advisory Board. He is also a consultant with Vivekanand International Foundation. Mr. Devasher has authored three highly acclaimed books on Pakistan and a recent one on the Pashtuns called The Pashtoons, A Contested History. There is no one who knows this region the way Mr. Devasher does. Join us today as we discuss the Pashtuns and the future of Pakistan. Mr. Devasher, it is such a privilege to have you with me on Insight today, um, especially on the occasion of the fact that you've just come out with this huge, voluminous work on the Pashtuns. It's called The Pashtuns, A Contested History. And, we'd love to talk about this book. But before I come to this, I really want to ask you what is happening with Pakistan. Every day we hear about depleting foreign reserves. Is it really on the brink of collapse?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to your for this program. And yes, you see, Pakistan is, the word crisis I think was sort of formed because of Pakistan. It's been in one form of crisis or the other right since its creation in '47. But this time around, the crisis, because several crises have come together. There's a political crisis, there's a security crisis, there's an economic crisis, there is a social crisis. So all of them have come together, and the name being given is a polycrisis. That is, each crisis feeds into the other, and collectively they become much more potent than any of single crisis. Now, talking about the economic crisis, yes, I wouldn't say collapse, but it's certainly standing at the brink. And for one immediate reason, which is that it's running out of foreign exchange reserves. Today, there are about 8,000 to 9,000 containers at Karachi port that cannot be offloaded because the banks don't have any money to give dollars for the LCs. So they're not being offloaded. And they contain food items and a lot of other stuff, which is imports, which are required to keep the wheels of the economy moving. And their so-called friends, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and China, have all promised a certain amount of money, collectively about $5 billion. But they said, first get your act done through the IMF. First let the IMF go through the ninth review, okay it, and give you $1 billion. Then they will chip in with their whatever money they wanted to give. They have rolled over debt already. Even this 3.5 or $4 billion of reserves is not Pakistan's own earnings. It is the money which these countries have given as safe deposits. And tough negotiations are going on with the IMF even as we speak. They've come for the ninth review, and we don't know what the end result will be. We'll come to know in a couple of days' time whether the IMF is happy. But before the IMF came, they've already met some of the preconditions, which is the rupees in free float. So it gained almost 40 rupees in about 2-3 hours. Shot up from 230 to 270. You can imagine if a similar situation were to happen in India, what a havoc it would be. So their currency has reached 270. They've had to increase the energy prices, both of gas and of petrol, which making now petrol out of the reach of a lot of people. So, this they have already done as preconditions. Having done that, the IMF delegation has come, and they will ultimately have to levy, I think, taxes. People are talking about 700 to 800 billion rupees worth of fresh taxation. So this is going to be crushing, for people. Their food stocks are low. There's a crisis of atta, flour, and they have to import something like 2 million tons of wheat. So yes, it is a major economic crisis. They are standing at the brink of collapse. And what is worse is that you don't see the kind of leadership, vision, or somebody saying, "Look, this is the decisive steps that we're going to take." First of all, you develop a political consensus with all the political parties on board. Yes, we're going through a crisis, but this is what we're going to do. Imran Khan is not going to even talk to the opposition. He is determined to force general elections, not realizing at this stage, elections are expensive. At this stage, how can you have elections?
But he's managed to gain a lot of popularity.
He is popular, no doubt, but popularity should bring a sense of responsibility. He's not exercising the responsibility which, as a popular leader, he should be doing, to come across as a statesman and not just be come across as somebody who's power hungry. So that is the economic. Then there's also a political crisis, a security crisis, which we can talk about as we go along.
For instance, the big bomb blast, that happened in Peshawar. Peshawar is also the capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Um, how do you think this has transformed? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, in 1946, the Pashtuns had voted against Pakistan. They voted for the Congress. How has this sort of resistance to the lure of religion transformed into, let's say, radicalization?
It's a very painful history for the Pashtuns. You see, as you mentioned, 46, the Khudai Khidmatgar Congress government was in power. And the British played a trick. You see, all the other assemblies were asked to vote whether they want accession to India or they want to vote accession to Pakistan. Now, for the NWFP, which is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it was critical that it joins Pakistan. Otherwise, and it was a 96% Muslim province, and it was critical that it joins Pakistan. But because there was a Congress government, the British feared that if it is put to vote in the assembly will vote for accession to India. So what happens to the partition plan of a Hindu India and a Muslim Pakistan? So Mountbatten insisted, even though elections had been held in 46, he said, no, we should have a referendum. And on the basis of India versus Pakistan. And the Ghaffar Khan and his brother and the Khudai Khidmatgar referendum for what? We just won the election on the basis of India or Pakistan, and we won. So they said, okay, if you have to have a referendum, then it must be a referendum on Pashtunistan. An independent sort of an autonomous province of the Pashtuns. And that Mountbatten said nothing of the day. There were only two choices. So then they boycotted, Khudai Khidmatgar boycotted the referendum, and the Muslim League won. Even though only 50% of the people voted, the Muslim League won. But because he talked about Pashtunistan, they continue to be very skeptical. Pakistan very skeptical about the loyalties of the Ghaffar Khan and the Pashtuns. So gradually, as the thing developed, they found that they could manipulate the Pashtuns by using the Islamic card, by manipulating their religious feelings, because the Pashtuns are deeply religious people. And though they were Deobandis with a strong Sufi tradition, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, a lot of fighters came from Arabs, and they brought with them the Wahhabi tradition. So the madrasas, they were Wahhabi. So the Pashtuns got infused with Wahhabism. So this whole radicalization began, one, because of the ideological underpinnings, and second, Pashtun society itself was rent asunder, and the traditional Maliks were all sort of pushed out, and new leaders came, religious leaders came to the fore, because they were the ones who were going to lead jihad. So from both sides, and this through the Taliban period, etc., is continued. That's why you find this kind of radicalization, the question that you asked, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa today. And this blast itself is because of this organization called the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which it's a very interesting, I'll go into some detail on this. When the US went into Afghanistan in 2001, the Taliban had to leave Afghanistan, and they sought shelter and sanctuary, a lot of them in Waziristan, North and South Waziristan. And the tribes over there, the Masoods and the Wazirs, gave them that shelter, gave them the security, and looked after them. These are the same people who later on in 2007 set up the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan after Musharraf attacked Lal Masjid. So today, when the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan needs shelter and sanctuary, the Afghan Taliban are certainly going to give it to them, because as per Pashtunwali, the code of the Pashtuns, they have to reciprocate. Pakistan had thought that once the Taliban are in power in Kabul, they will defang the TTP, take away the weapons, hand them back, and then they could be settled over here. But the Taliban said there is no way we can go against the TTP. We can facilitate talks. So 2 rounds of talks, talks went in 2 stages. Ceasefire was agreed to, but that was just a tactic for the TTP to gather more strength. And once the ceasefire broke down, because their condition was that the merger of the federally administered tribal area, that FATA, with KPK should be demerged, and that basically they will run this place on their own, which the state and the army said nothing of the sort. So the ceasefire was broken, and there has been a spate of attacks since November, even earlier, but especially since November when the ceasefire broke down. There was an attack on Bannu counter-terrorism department last month, and now this horrific attack on the Peshawar. So the TTP is gathering strength. They have a lot of fighters, and at one time they were allowed, when Faiz Hamid was negotiating with them, they were allowed to come back to Swat. So they are present in Swat also, which is creating, they had been cleared from Swat about a decade ago. They're back in Swat. They're all over the, in FATA, the erstwhile FATA. And there are some reports, I don't know if they're confirmed or not, that they've also tied up with one section of the Baloch.
Yes, I was about to ask you
Yeah,
that.
the Baloch, this thing. So, they combine, my enemy is your enemy. The Baloch are secular. They are not radicalized. But my enemy is your enemy kind of a thing. So they are cooperating.
So that's what I wanted to ask you. My next question is that, it seems like Afghanistan is giving shelter to a lot of Pakistan, anti-Pakistan elements like BLA and, TTP. Taliban's also made some anti-Pakistan statements recently. Do you think that maybe Pakistan was premature in its celebrations when the Taliban took Kabul over? And how do you think this is going to play out?
Absolutely. They were totally premature. In fact, in conventional wisdom in Pakistan was that, 20 years we've supported the Taliban to come back into power because they will look after our security interest, at least in three respects. One, India will be pushed out of Kabul. Taliban will recognize the Durand line. And third, they will defang the TTP. Year and a half later, none of these have happened. They were totally miscalculation. India is back in Kabul at the request of the Taliban, who want us to complete infrastructure projects. In fact, Mullah Yaqub, the son of Mullah Omar and the acting defense minister, has said, we will send our army officers to you to train. That's one. They have not recognized the Durand line. They will never recognize the Durand line. Because, they don't believe. After 1949, no Afghan government has accepted the Durand line. So there is no, as far as they are concerned, there is no Afghan-Pakistan border. And they have uprooted the fence also in parts. And third, as I just mentioned, they will not defang the TTP and they've given them shelter. So, total miscalculation on the part of Pakistan, as a result of which, today, Pak-Afghan relations are pretty tense. There have been fighting, especially in Chaman. They've shot at each other. Afghanistan has accused Pakistan of allowing their airspace to be used by the Americans for drone flights. And they have said, we've got video evidence. When Al-Zawahiri was killed, so they said the drone came over Pakistan, we have evidence, and you're playing a very dangerous game. Pakistan says you're given shelter to TTP over there, and they are the ones who are attacking us. So many in Pakistan have also talked about hot pursuit and kinetic action inside Afghanistan on TTP camps. Afghanistan has warned them, don't do this. Because if you do, then it is left unstated what will happen. Because whereas the Afghan Taliban cannot match the conventional strength of the Pakistan army, yet they have lots of suicide bombers. So terrorism will escalate exponentially, especially in the case of suicide bombing, like you saw in the Peshawar. So Pakistan is in a tough state. And one other point, you see, the way I look at it, because I've studied this area, in my book, Pakistan is actually faced with a pincer Pashtun movement. There are the Taliban who don't recognize the Durand line. That means there is no territory or border. The TTP who want the demerger of FATA. So from both sides of the Durand line, the Pashtuns are pushing. And this could lead to a larger Pashtun consciousness on both sides of the Durand line. And that will be fatal for Pakistan. If that happens, that will be fatal. Because even the mainstream political parties will have no option but to join this.
Correct. I was going to come to that. But before I come to that, do you think also the kind of statements that we've seen from Taliban being made against Pakistan is a way for Taliban to get, a population in Afghanistan to support them more, to get more appreciation from the masses? Because, Afghanistan's never accepted the Durand line anyway. So is this a way to sort of magnify the...
Yes, I mean, any government anywhere, when it presses the nationalist button, you do attract support. But in the case of the Pashtuns, especially in Afghanistan, everybody knows that they don't accept the Durand line. Whether it was Karzai, whether it was Ghani, whether it was Burhanuddin Rabbani, Masood, if nobody has accepted the Durand line after 1949 when the Lower Jirga was held. So people accept that the Taliban know that they will get support and people will support on this. And if Pakistan were to launch a couple of attacks, they would unify all the minorities also, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks and the Hazaras, who today are not very comfortable with the Taliban and the way they're governing. But when it comes to a foreign country attacking them, like throughout history, they will certainly come together and join with the Taliban, or at least support the Taliban.
You also said this sort of combination of these nationalist groups, which traditionally have not had much in common, like BLA and
That's Baloch,
yeah, and TDP. And do you think now there seems to be some sort of collaboration? And if so, what sort of an impact would that have on the CPAC, especially on Godar?
The two separate things. One is the Baloch, who are opposed to the CPAC, who are opposed to the Chinese presence, who are opposed to what they're doing in Gwadar. So that is going to continue irrespective of what happens on the Durand line and on this. This is a Pashtun issue. And there, yes, you had some time ago, in fact, there have been 3 of them, something called the Pashtun Qaumi Jirga, where Pashtuns all over Pakistan, political parties, PTM, intellectuals, got together and tried to formulate a roadmap of the Pashtun areas as a whole. And they talked about elections in Afghanistan, treatment of women, opening of schools, and things like that. So there was some sort of a blueprint. Of course, they're very weak at the moment. They're not very strong, but at least all the Pashtuns in Pakistan had got together, and they also got expressions of support from Pashtun leaders in Afghanistan too. So there is this nascent movement with a vision for the Pashtuns, the future of the Pashtuns.
So, how strong would you say is the Pashtun national identity at the moment?
The national identity is very strong. The Pashtun national identity is very strong. But whether it translates into having one Pashtun nation, there is a famous phrase in Pashto, Laro bar yo Afghan, which means low as the lowlands of Pakistan and high as the highlands of Afghanistan are one. So that sentiment, which PTM has been, Pashtun Tahfuz has been pushing a lot, that is popular. But whether it translates into something more concrete in terms of a Pashtunistan, either unifying all the areas, even of Pakistan, Pashtun areas of Pakistan, or moving a step ahead for autonomy, or further, merger with Afghanistan or an independent Pashtun entity, that is still in the distant future.
You've mentioned in your book about how one of the first introductions to Pashtun culture or Pashtun way of life, Pashtun Wali, was the Kabuli Wala. And that was the same for me. We had this image from this poem that we all read in school. But would I be correct in saying that Talibanization sort of subsumed the Pashtun national identity? And with this emergence now of PTM, and there seems to be a revival of it. Do you think that'll go far?
See, the Taliban actually are an aberration in the Pashtun history, because it is not only a Deobandi organization, which the Pashtuns are, but it has a strong infusion of Wahhabi Salafi influence because of the impact of the Soviet jihad and the madrasas and all that was set up, and of the activities of Tablighi Jamaat. The other Pashtuns, in Pakistan and other areas of Afghanistan, are not so what the Taliban are. They are more of a folksy Islam, where traditions like Urz, praying on the graves, and Taweez, all these things are very popular. This is a folksy kind of Islam which the Pashtuns have always followed. In fact, people don't forget, because of the Taliban, the Pashtun areas were a very strong influence of Sufis. Cities like Ghazni, Herat, Peshawar, Kandahar, Kabul, Jalalabad, very strong Sufi centers. In fact, Herat traditionally was called Khak-e-Auliya, the soil of Sufi saints. Ghazni was called the abode of Sufi saints. In fact, the most popular Sufi shrine in Pakistan, which is Data Darbar, the saint who is buried there is from Ghazni, Al-Hajwari. He was called Data Ganj Baksh, and he came in the 11th century from Ghazni and settled in Lahore. And this is the most famous Sufi shrine. Ahmad Shah Abdali, who set up the Afghan empire, was a Naqshbandi, a Sufi. Mullah Omar, you know, was taught by a Sufi Haji Baba, and he would visit till 2001 the grave of his teacher every week and go and pray on the grave of his teacher, which the Al Qaeda was very upset about. That this is so there's a very strong Sufi culture, but that Sufi culture and influence has been destroyed or certainly lessened because of the Wahhabi Salafi influence in among the Pashtuns. So it's not that all of them are going to become or have become Wahhabi Salafi. It's just the Taliban ideology. In fact, Taliban ideology doesn't match any of the other 50 Islamic countries in the world. The people from Al Azhar who came to talk to Mullah Omar, not to destroy the Bamiyan Buddhas, they went back and said, these guys don't know Islam. They don't know Sharia because they don't know Arabic, they haven't read the scriptures. They cannot support their arguments with any reference to any scholarship. So it's a very strange kind of a mix with the Taliban. So not all Pashtuns are certainly not Taliban. All Taliban are Pashtuns. but a few of them are, token Tajiks and Uzbeks and things like that.
So coming back to Pakistan, the Pashtuns were at one point seen as possibly their greatest threat, the Pashto National Identity. But maybe with them being a really large part of the armed forces in Pakistan, at least percentage-wise, would you say that that sort of helped them integrate, and now they might have a different perspective towards the Pakistani armed forces?
You see, there are a couple of points in this. Even though they're well integrated in the army, transport, Karachi is the largest Pashtun city, even more than Kandahar or Peshawar. Yet the feeling of alienation among the Pashtuns in Pakistan, that they are second-class citizens. I'll give you an example. PTM was formed when this Masood boy, Naqibullah Masood, was killed in Karachi in 2018 by Rao Anwar, the police officer. He's just been released. He has just been released, and so the Pashtuns are up in arms.
Yeah, there's this newspaper headline that's saying nobody killed.
Yeah, nobody killed Naqibullah Masood. So, this is the kind of alienation. Likewise, in university, wherever they've sought refuge, they're looked upon as terrorists. There's a lot of racial profiling of the Pashtuns. So there is a strong undercurrent of alienation. Today, they realize that economically, they are far better off in Pakistan than they are in Afghanistan because it's been a war economy for the last 50 years. They're much better off in Pakistan. As you mentioned, the army, the transport networks, and so on. But the fact that they share common bonds, common descent, common religion, common cultural, ethnic, linguistic, familial bonds, makes, the pull of ethnicity is very strong. Like Wali Khan's favorite statement that I have been a Pashtun for thousands of years.
Correct.
A Musalman for 1400.
And Pakistan.
Only for 40.
Yeah.
So, for him,
that's
the ethnic identity. Well. Yeah, the ethnic identity.
So that trumps over a national identity, the ethnic identity.
The ethnic identity is national identity. It's a national identity. It at times trumps over even religion because, Pashtun Wali is much older than Islam. So, Mullah Omar, for example, he refused to hand over Osama bin Laden even when the Islamic scholars came to him. He said, I've given him refuge as per Pashtun Wali, not Sharia. As per Pashtun Wali, I cannot hand him over. He said, I'm willing to lose, Afghanistan, but I'm not going to hand over Osama bin Laden. So that is the strong
code of honor.
Yeah. So, it is, so I think this is what is the TTP has also realized that if they play the ethnic nationalist card, Taliban have realized this, the PTM has always been pushing it, ANP has been pushing it, Pakhtunkhwa Milli Awami Party has been pushing it. So there is this shoots of Pashtun nationalism coming up to the fore. Now, how it develops, a great deal will depend on how the Pakistan Army tackles this. This release of Rao Anwar has been a shocker. Bomb blasts which are happening, and even the policemen are protesting. They were saying कि ये नामालूम अफराद नहीं है. We know who these guys who did it, and that they are talking to terrorists who are attacking their families. So lots of churning is going on in the Pashtun areas. So if Pakistan doesn't get it right, if it doesn't tackle it with a certain amount of sophistication, they're going to land up in some sort of a trouble.
Do you see the obliteration, complete uh, dissolve of the Durand line anytime soon?
See, again, a lot would depend on how the Pashtuns themselves organize about this. The fact is, 1949, I mentioned earlier, the Loya Jirga held in Afghanistan, in which they rescinded the Durand Line, all the previous treaties that were held between Britain and Afghanistan, and also the Treaty of Gandamak 1879. So, as far as they're concerned, their border comes right up to, Peshawar and all these areas are part of the original kingdom of Ahmad Shah Abdali. Pakistan has not formulated any new treaty with the Pashtuns. And though Pakistan says this is an international border, we accept it, they know there is a weakness. And that weakness is that the last treaty between Afghanistan and British India was the 1921 Treaty of Kabul, which defined the boundary. And that said this treaty is valid for 3 years. And after 3 years, by giving 1 year's notice, any of the two sides can rescind the treaty. So the Afghans argued that we've rescinded the treaty in 1949. So there is no border. Pakistan knows this is a weakness. And therefore, they have pushed the Taliban in the 1990s 3 times. They got them to ask them to recognize it. They said, we can't do it. Rabbani and Masood did not do it. As I mentioned, Karzai didn't do it. The Taliban in the present avatar have also refused to accept the Durand Line. But Pakistan keeps pressing on this because they know it is a weakness, it is a fault line. So, if the Pashtuns can organize themselves on both sides, then it's a different, a ball game. But if they remain divided as they are at the moment, and the Pakistan army continues to dominate, then it will be very difficult. But this is an issue. This is a festering sore, and this is going to continue. It's not an easy solution to this.
What do you think it would take for them to come on the same, agreement?
They have to realize. See, what the Pashtuns really lack is leadership. I wrote in my book what the Pashtuns really need is another Ahmad Shah Abdali or a Amir Abdul Rahman, the Iron Amir, to, through the force of their will and force of character, bring all the Pashtuns together on one platform.
And why hasn't that happened?
Leadership, leadership is not something that, grows automatically. Countries are very fortunate when they can get leadership through vision. And, who have a vision and work steadfastly to develop that vision. So right now, the potential I feel, if you were to ask me amongst all this, is the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement. And, because they have a non-political agenda. It's a civil rights movement. They're not looking for office. They're not looking for any benefits. But they just say that stop treating Pashtuns as cannon fodder. We want the same rights under the constitution that the Punjabis have or what the Sindhis have. But you keep pushing us out and you develop this area for terrorism that you want to, road go into Central Asia, or that time you wanted to attack the US forces. We are not willing to be treated as cannon fodder again. Now, this is something that can develop further. And they have a young, charismatic leader in Manzoor Pashtun. So, that is one particular potential.
And this could appeal on both the sides.
Yes.
Fantastic. What do you think is the future of the Taliban in Afghanistan? Do you think it will rise or fall anytime soon?
You see, they have captured Afghanistan militarily. And it is not an inclusive government. The Uzbeks, the Hazaras, the Tajiks, and many among the Pashtuns themselves are not very happy with them. And because it's a military victory and non-inclusive government, it will not last long. But there is something which I mentioned in the book also, Afghan time. Things will happen on the pace of the Afghan time. It will not happen tomorrow. It may not have been happen for 5 years. After all, it took the Taliban 20 years to get back into Kabul. So right now there is very little resistance. There are some reports about differences between the Kandharis and the Khoswals, Sirajuddin Haqqani group. There are some reports of differences, but we don't know how serious they are. Then you have the people in the north, the resistance front, who are trying to develop some sort of a resistance to the Taliban. This will take time. This is in the future. This is going to take time to develop, and Pashtuns are not in a hurry anyway, as they have their own pace of thing, and the Pashtun who took revenge after 100 years since he took it too soon. That's the kind of time.
Correct. Correct. You've obviously, this is a very important book because it gives us such deep insight on the Pashtuns, and Pashtuns are playing such a huge role in this region. What more can, our readers, expect from your book?
Well, it gives a good insight into who the Pashtuns are. Where did they come from? What are their origins? What is Pashtun Valley? What is the kind of geography of that area? And what makes the Pashtuns such robust fighters? For example, one thing, Pashtunistan has been invaded more than any other part of the world. The Greeks, the Persians, the Sakas, the Kushans, the White Huns, the Arabs, the Mongols, the Turks, the Mughals, the British, the Soviets, the US. Everybody tried to subdue them, but they couldn't. And that's why it's called the graveyard of empires. And the reason was simple, that the Pashtuns don't know defeat in the classical sense. They only know survival. They know when to run, they know when to hide, they know when to talk, they know when to fight, as per Afghan time. So, that is something which comes out in the book. Then, I talk about the British. Fascinating. The British dealt with the Pashtuns for 100 years, more than anyone else. So, what were their views of the Pashtuns? How did they define the Pashtuns? What are the policies that they implemented? The closed border school versus the forward school, the great game, the 3 Afghan wars. So that's I like that chapter a lot. And then about the rise of the Taliban, the US, the mistakes that the US made.
Why, if I may ask you so, why did you title it A Contested History?
Because, this area has been contested throughout history. For example, just in the Middle Ages, it was contested between the Mughals, the Mughals in India, the Safavids in Persia, and the Uzbeks north of the Oxus for 200 years. Sometimes Kandahar would fall to Mughals, sometimes the Mughals took Mazar, Herat fell for a while, so it was contested. Then it became contested between Britain and Russia during the Great Game. Then it became contested between the Soviet Union and the United States, when they invaded. Then contested between the US when they came in on the war on terror. So it's been contested throughout history. That's what makes it such a fascinating, such a
fascinating subject. Finally, let me ask you, what does all this churn that's happening here, what does it mean for India? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel India is really not focused that much on the happenings in Pakistan. It seems to have other, geopolitical targets. Pakistan still seems to have some amount of interest in India. Maybe it will always have. But what does its instability mean for India? Pakistan, and with its security issues, its economic issues.
You see, I think for India, because we've really come on the global stage. So Pakistan as a neighbor is important, but we are looking at it from the rear view mirror. India is more into Quad, into the Asia Pacific, G20, SCO. You're looking at a macro global picture. So Pakistan is an irritant. As a neighbor, you can't wish away a neighbor. So, and also the fact that Pakistan doesn't want to dialogue. They've been very categorical since Imran Khan's time that unless and until India reverses the changes of 5th August 2019, there can be no dialogue, there can be no trade. So it's no water off our backs. You don't want to talk, don't talk. हमें तो फर्क नहीं पड़ता. Even in terms of trade. You see, today, because of the economic situation in Pakistan, as we talked about it earlier, the easiest thing for them was to have traded with India, got wheat and other shipments, cotton and things from India, and maybe even asked India for a loan. That'll be, but they have this kind of feeling that you're parity and we can't, and they are this and they are that. So India continues to be very important for Pakistan, but I think the reverse is not true. You want to talk, fine, then don't put preconditions. And then, like Imran Khan was who personally targeted the Prime Minister personally, made some horrible comments. And Bilawal Bhutto has followed suit. Yeah. So where is the incentive for anybody in Delhi to even take baby steps? There is none.
So that we are clear on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out and being here and giving us such a comprehensive view on what the Pashtuns are, who they are, and what the problems that Pakistan faces today are. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you
here.
so much for having me over and
Not at
discussing
all.
my book. Thanks a lot.
Not at all. Best of luck.
Thank you.
That was Mr. Tilak Devasher, an absolute authority on the Afghan region. Mr. Devasher's new book, The Pashtoons, A Contested History, is a must buy for anybody who wants to deep dive into the politics of the region. On Pakistan, he says that the balkanization of the country might be still some time away, but its many, many problems are not going away anytime soon. Thank you for watching. Until next time.